Councilman Byrd, talk about what led up to this point. What led to you sitting in these chambers every week and now on Zoom? Talk a little about your history, your background, where you come from.
Oh man, I was born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was a part of an anti-drug group in the 80s when drugs hit Chattanooga really hard, called the Happy Clowns. And we traveled around the city telling kids to say no to drugs, uplifting communities. We sung and danced old New Edition songs, and just tried to tell kids that, you know, it's a better life than just living in these streets, dealing with drugs and gangs and violence and stuff like that. And after that group, I became a part of a boy band called The New Beginning. And me, Reginald McKibbins, Usher Raymond, and Charles Yarbrough, Adrian Johnson, we traveled the world, and our mentor, leader of the group, Darryl Wheeler, he made sure that we just stayed positive, and our protest was through music, our energy was through positivity, and just trying to make sure we just could get message out in a negative world. And so when those values and morals was instilled into me, I wanted to be the change I wanted to see. You know, I knew I couldn't be a police officer. I knew I couldn't be the president, so to say, I thought. And then once I started to see the change in our society, and I went out and talked to the community, I was like, hey, you know, I could be a council person. I can sit up at the dais and I can get rid of all the bad people. I can change the hearts of men. I can make sure people do the right thing. I can make sure people show love and compassion. I can just be a listening ear for those who feel that they're not being heard. And unfortunately, I started to realize that that's not how things work. You know, you can't change the heart of men. You can't make people change their inner core. You can't legislate morals and values. And so now I'm here trying to just hear the people and see what things I can do at the Chattanooga level to just push things forward and change from this level, you know, and see what other levels I could go to.
Sure. And so several years later, we are at a very pivotal point in our history. You're an African-American male, I'm an African-American male, and I think there's no way to put it other than the country is hurting right now, specifically the African-American community.
Yes.
You know, we've seen several black individuals die, you know, just because of a lack of respect, it seems, between them, not only law enforcement, but from our white counterparts.
Right.
And that sort of led to this newfound movement, if you will. Yes. And so out of that newfound movement, we've saw several different emotions evolve, and whether that be violence or whether that be peace. And so I have to ask you, you know, how do you feel about this newfound movement? What are your thoughts about this Black Lives Matter movement?
Man, I love the energy. I love it. I think I salute them. I think everyone plays a part. We have to find a way to accept their grievances. We have to find a way to accept their pain and figure out how to channel it in a positive direction. So I salute those guys and those ladies and that are out there on the front line, because if they didn't do what they did, you know, a lot of laws wouldn't change. We wouldn't be here where we are today. But we still have to pay homage to the ones who came before us, and we can't disrespect their legacies. We have to let people know that, you know, this building, John P. Franklin, we named it after him. You got Mr. Mapp, you got Bishop Hunter, you have W.H.H. Wright. You know, you have so many people that has paved the way and laid the groundwork and protest and done it in a peaceful manner. And Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, you know, I mean, the list goes on, and you see where change has come, you know, but we're not where we need to be. And I just think that we have a long way to go, but the way to get there is through love. And you think of all the protests, all the things that came about. Love was the key that brought us together, that allowed us to be able to sit at tables again across from people that you know that don't like you, you know that don't care about you, to go into communities and create affordable housing, like we did up in Overlook apartments and the Bayberry apartments, changing the scope of how our city is ran, because we don't have such a good history in Chattanooga, but it's people that laid the groundwork to make sure that we get these things, and that are still laying the groundwork, and we just have to figure out a way to sit at the table and give everybody a little bit of understanding and say, hey, I'm going to give you something, you need to give me something, we need to meet at the table in the right way, and that's what we need to work on. And that love, that understanding that I respect you and I love you and I want the best for you, no matter whose ideal is the best, no matter who's sitting at the council seat or the mayor's seat, what's the best idea, what's the best thing to do? And I think if we get to that point, that's when we'll start seeing true change.
Right. What does a Chattanooga, a progressive Chattanooga look like to you?
A progressive Chattanooga looks like when I go downtown, I can see people who look like me. I can hear music that make me smile, make me feel good. When I can see police officers that look like me, when I can see people in CEO positions running the riverfront, running Riverbend, running Moon River, when you see these things happening and people are in position that make you feel proud to say, hey, I know that guy, or hey, this guy's from Chattanooga and he's in that position. Once we start to see more people in leadership roles, that's the progressive Chattanooga I want to see. A lot of times, people think about the money and all the accolades that people can get, but at the end of the day, just to give these young kids hope to know that you can be a president, you can be a city councilman, you can be a chief of police, you can even be the mayor of Chattanooga. So when you hear things like that and you can show them that, that's when you start seeing the progressiveness. And we're not there yet. And I think we have to start instilling that in our kids at a young age to let them know that you can do it, because right now it's almost like a badge of shame to be a council person, to be a police officer, to be in a political position. But you gotta think, these people in the political positions, if they look like you, if they from where you're from, they understand and have empathy for the struggles that we go through every day. But it's definitely, I think we talked about this earlier, a group of people that want to keep the grievances of African Americans in the public eye, so that they can keep their job, they can keep their identity. Because if the patient gets well, they lose their job. But if the patient continues to be sick and think that he has no way out, that person keeps their job and their identity. And so I'm here to let you know, hey, we can get better. It's medicine for us. We can come up out of this.
Yeah. And so I know there are several people who think that obviously the protests have had several levels,
right.
Even in Chattanooga. I mean, we've seen it more severe across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chattanooga, we saw sort of, things kind of heat up a little bit, and then the next day heat up a little bit more.
Right.
Then we saw a week of peace, and now we're seeing a little bit more aggressiveness. So things are sort of shifted, once again, that emotion. And so, some might argue that, the looting, the rioting, all of those things, are obviously wrong, but do you understand where a lot of the pain comes from? Do you understand where some of that stuff comes from some of those groups of people within the protest?
Right. I live that pain. I'm a black man. That pain has been my life since I've been a kid. I've had run-ins with the law when it came to me at just going to the mall one day. I've had issues where I've been pulled over and asked to lay on the ground and I haven't done anything. And I was angry. I wanted to fight. I wanted to hurt someone, I wanted to get that officer fired. I wanted to get my revenge, But as I got older, I'm 44 years old now, I realized that it's not always, feasible or always sensible to always ball up your fists and fight. And I do understand sometimes you have to fight, you know, because if you don't stand for something, you lay down for everything. So it's just an equal balance. You got to have a balance. So I lived that life. I understand. I wasn't always a councilman, and I always have to put on these suits. You know, I'm just like you. I grew up in the streets of Chattanooga. I lived in every project here in Chattanooga. I'm the product of a teenage mother. Mother had me when she was 15 years old. You know, we had to deal with a lot of struggles, and a lot of times we went out eating. A lot of times, you know, my mom couldn't get that job. You know, you hear these stories, and you just don't understand the background of people. You see the representative that's in front of you right now, and I have to be a certain way. But it's nowhere in this city I don't think I could go and not be welcome, because I just think I've laid the foundation of love and understanding. And I worked at the courthouse for 25 years, and no one can tell you they came to that courthouse and Anthony Byrd didn't help them. Anthony Byrd didn't look out for them. Anthony Byrd didn't go talk to the judge, didn't go try to find you a lawyer, because I know that you don't have the money. I know you probably don't even understand how the court system works. So I want to stop and talk to you. That's been my life, you know, and that's just the protest that I live, you know, that's what I had to do.
Sure, sure. Within the protest are calls for equality.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been hearing equity.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we can reach that point? I mean, because there's, like you said, there's so many layers. There's you know, people calling for housing, better
Right.
housing. There's people calling for better education. There's people calling for economic stability. There's so many different layers. But how do you plan on addressing those things in your time as a councilman? And even, you know, after that?
Well, we've addressed it with securing 30 years of affordable housing when it came to the Overlook apartments, 30 years of affordable housing when it came to Bayberry apartments, 30 years of affordable housing when it came to the Patton Towers. So those are going to be affordable for 30 years. So that's something that me and this body did, and so that's part of it. Then you look at job creations when you have M&M Industries that's here in Chattanooga, when you have HomeServe that's here in Chattanooga, Volkswagen, Gestump, that's a part of that, you know, ability to keep growing and to show that you know, it is some equality, it is some things that's coming up. But when you have paying honor to our heroes that came before us, this building, John P. Franklin, Mr. Mapp, you look at Bishop Hunter, Mr. H.H. Wright. So these are things that we're doing to keep that legacy going and to show you that, you know, it is equality here in Chattanooga. But then, once again, it's a group of people that's going to keep those grievances out there and not accept the strides that have been put forth. You know, the jobs that we bring, they're not a livable wage, they're not enough. But I know plenty of families who are eating and taking care of their families and living good lives from those jobs. The housing is not good enough, but several people that I've helped get into it, those housing, and paid their rent and paid their light bill. We have the Office of Power Empowerment, where, you know, these people are able to, where people are able to go and get help. You know, these people that need the help so bad. You know, we put money toward the homeless coalition. It's not enough. You know, it's never enough, and we're working with what we have. And when you look at a budget as high as $70 million for the police, or as low as $4 million for Parks and Rec, you wonder why those numbers are so staggering. You know, it's the reality that we live in, and we need to be able to change it, but we have to find balance. That doesn't seem balanced. So at some point in time, we have to see how that balance is going to come, and we have to keep on pushing. We have to keep on fighting. We have to keep on educating ourselves. But the way we get there is through respect, and through sitting down talking with each other, me having mutual respect for you, you having mutual respect for me, and just showing a little bit of love and understanding and empathy from who's sitting across the table from you. Because everyone walking around Avondale with a gun is not a gangbanger. Everyone walking around with a badge and a gun is not a racist. You know, so now where do we get to start the conversation?
Dennis, talk a little about your background, where you're from, you know, how do we get to this?
How do we get to this point? What is this point, by the way? So, I'm from Avondale, but born and raised in Avondale. And I'm trying to figure out what point, like, in politics, or just kind of how we got to the point of the Urban Policy Institute stuff,
Well,
maybe?
your age now, I mean.
36.
What built up to your advocacy? What
Yeah,
built up
so I took a early interest in public policy because, like many of us who live in African American communities, we see people not, we see a lot of disparities in our communities, and we raise our hands and be like, what can I do, to fix those types of things? And so early on in my career, I started doing work in the community to address those to address those disparities. If it was in helping recruit teachers, I worked at the Public Education Foundation. I've worked, did PR at Tennessee Temple University. I've worked at Hope for the Inner City with people who are in gangs. And when I founded the Chattanooga Urban Policy Institute, it was from a personal issue where my brother, who was murdered of gun violence in Chattanooga, and I was like, what are we doing to help young black men get off the streets and have the same opportunities that many of us are afforded to have access to quality housing? The booming economic in Chattanooga, where we're the city of creators and opportunities. And I saw an opportunity where we could help people who were previously incarcerated, people who were gang affiliated, to get access to those same opportunities. So that's what we do at the Chattanooga Urban Policy Institute. We help people get back on their feet and off the street and connect them with opportunities in housing, employment, and behavioral health counseling.
Cool. So now, 2020, here we are in this never-before-seen movement.
Yeah.
I say never-before-seen because it's different.
It's different, yeah.
It's different from the protest 50 years ago. 50 years ago, which are not long ago. And so the death of George Floyd and the several others, Sandra Bland and Ahmaud Arbery and Eric Garner. So all of these cases are starting to build, and they're starting to be highlighted and relived with George Floyd's death. But the message has sort of been reacted to on many different levels.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
We've seen the protests, we've seen in Chattanooga even, we saw sort of a progression of how the reaction has been.
For sure.
It started out like not being as strong. It started off really, just slow at first, and then that next day, things got
built,
violent. It built, and then for the rest of the week, we saw things kind of lighten up a little bit more, and then it kind of
got back up again. Yeah.
So
thanks, City Council budget.
Yeah, and now we're at the budget.
Yeah.
And so, I have to ask, what are your thoughts about this movement?
Yeah, I think the movement is beautiful. I think the movement is overdue. It's so exciting to finally see the momentum from white people who in some cases have been silent in the movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is a global movement. It's just not for black people to be the torchbearers of. And now that you have a more global community advocating for black men to live, I think the momentum and the impact is greater. Black Lives Movement, to me, is a public policy movement. We're talking about how do we change systemic racism, just not in the police department, but in the judicial system, in the education system, in the banking system, when there's some, inequalities on how African Americans get access to loans. And so for me, a person who works in public policy, we look at the Black Lives Movement not just as rallies or protests, but it's an opportunity for community members and people who are fed up, black people, white people, to have a conversation on how do we change policy, because that's the outcome we're looking for. But if we've got to protest, if we have to rally to get to that point, then that's just what it takes. But we look at Black Lives Matter movement as a public policy movement, and not a movement that's personality based. It's not a movement that's about protesters or about one individual or their political ambitions. It's a movement that has a message that we want change. We want policy change. We want economic change. We want police change. You know, we want changes in the DA's office. And so for me, Black Lives Matter movement and the momentum really, in essence, is the revolution that we've been waiting on when people are finally having the conversation about how do we change public policy as it relates to communities of color.
Yeah, yeah. And so, just as a sub-question from that,
Sure.
you know, changing the narrative of what the protest looks
Yeah.
like, because that seems to be like an underlying theme. Changing that narrative and making sure that it's spun, it's
inclusive.
proactive. How should the Black community react when they see another video released or another case comes forward?
I mean, we should react in rage. You know, I think, you know, it's a very, as a Black man who is constantly seeing images in popular media of us being killed, you know, your natural reaction to things like that is rage, because you're sick and tired of the same narrative and then nothing changed. And so this movement, these protests, these rallies, when you see people protesting, you're really seeing the passion. And I know sometimes it gets lost in translation when you see people who may use explicitives. You know, they may cuss. You know, I cuss sometimes, you know, when I'm angry. So it's a natural reaction to pain and suffering. And the Black community is just fed up. And that's their natural and God-given response to inaction from public policy figures.
Sure, sure. And so the budget, the 2021 budget is underway.
Yeah.
And this is a very pivotal time, and it just so happens to fall, you know, in the wake of Floyd's death.
Yeah.
You know, today's Juneteenth. So it's pivotal. But some may argue that, like, wow, like, it's so late to bring up our concerns for what we want this money to go to.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever too late to ask questions. You know, I was very pleased when Councilman Anthony Byrd voted no to give community members more time because of the environment we're in. People are asking questions. People are demanding change. And so when he voted no, it was to allow more dialogue because people want to be heard. And that's the public, that's democracy, you know. And so I think there still is time. You know, the budget has not passed. I think, you know, you got to look at more than just the police budget. When people say, because I'm not for defunding the police, you know, I think our communities are over-policed, but I think there are some good officers. There are some bad officers, and I think we have a system in place that deals with bad officers, bad public officials, bad public works, whatever. But we have to expand that conversation beyond just the police budget. We have to look at, you know, public works budget. We've got to look at the recreation center budgets. We maybe need to look at the Department of Economic Development budget and really do a thorough analysis on how these budgets, if they're indeed impacting communities of color. And so I don't respond when people say defund the police because I don't believe in that. I think we need to do an analysis, and just not on the police department. You know, we need to do it for the court system. You know, the DA's office. I think we need to go through juvenile court budget and to make sure that we're spending money that really impacts communities of color.
Right, right. And then, you know, like you said, making sure all of that is evaluated. Putting this money in 2021, what is this going to look like? And
what's the impact? You know,
right.
Are we spending money? Are we spending taxpayers' money? Not government. So some people be like, oh, the money doesn't belong to the government. It's the taxpayers' dollars. Are we spending it? Are we getting a bang for our buck? When you pay your sales tax or your property tax, is it really going back into your community? Is it impacting brown and black lives? And that's the question that we're asking. And so again, kudos to Councilman Anthony Byrd, who's giving us time and with his no vote to evaluate that, which is a very good question. That's one of the purposes of the Black Lives Matter movement, is to say, hey, wait, we matter. Where you spend money in our community matters. And so we appreciate public figures who listen, they learn, and then they lead with their vote.
Yeah. What does a progressive Chattanooga look like for you? What does a future for Chattanooga look like for you?
A progressive Chattanooga looks more color. When we think of progressive, we think of ideology as far as conservatism or liberalism, and it's not that. Progressive is literally, are things better? Did you make progress? And I think in order for the city to make adequate progress, we have to start investing in communities of color, specifically African American males, who don't oftentimes have access to the same opportunities as our white counterparts or even as our female counterparts, which is why you have organizations such as the Chattanooga Urban Policy Institute. We're working to close that gap and to give more economic and social economic access for African American males. So when you look at a progressive Chattanooga, it has to be inclusive and more beneficial to communities of color.
Right.
One of the conversations that what prompted this story was to let people know that there's different ways to protest. Not everybody who protests will do it at a rally. Not everybody who protests believes in F the police. And I encourage people that, find your own way to protest. If you want to support a black business, if you want to make a donation to a black organization that's helping social services in black communities, those are ways that you can use your dollars and your influence to be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, because not everybody believes in F the police. And sometimes I understand how that can be a distraction to the message. And again, I just echo, for several of us in the community, including elected officials, the Black Lives Matter movement is not about one person. It's not about an individual. And it's most certainly not a platform to launch a campaign on or to make a political statement. This is literally about the lives that we have lost to police brutality and how we can make some public policy changes to make communities of color thrive and equitable throughout Chattanooga, throughout the world. So we can be alive. So I just want to get that out there. That was one of the nuggets that Callie and I talked about. I was like, people protest in many different ways. People protest with their dollars by not supporting certain businesses. We've seen responses to people saying, I'm not going to eat here because of that. I'm protesting a restaurant right now because of, I was one of them. I'm still protesting, So I just want people to realize that the Black Lives Matter movement is just so broad.